Industria is an indie FPS that aims to tell a compelling story with all of its shooting action. From a gameplay perspective, the shooting is solid. Most of the guns have decent sound effects and are fun to use. The visual look and the focus on exploring, finding all the nooks and crannies you can for supplies reminded me of the Bioshock series. The story for the most part is a strength for the game. The main character has good chemistry with someone trying to help her over the radio. There are also a fair amount of flaws from the game's abrupt ending, some of the enemies' attack patterns, and the rocky first hour. Thankfully, the game greatly improves after the first hour and provides a very enjoyable experience. The main focus of the gameplay will be on the gunplay and the exploration. You are limited in what guns you can use. You have a pistol, SMG, shotgun, and the game said that there was a rifle, but I must have missed it since I never came across it. The sound effects are pretty good for the guns, with the SMG and shotgun sounding the best out of the bunch. The impact is decent as well since you will be fighting robots. You can blow off parts of their body from their head to their arms and legs. The campaign provides a nice amount of different shootout situations, from smaller encounters to larger fights and even some that feel ripped right out of a survival horror title. The smaller fights are mixed in with much of the exploration. Do not expect the most expansive levels, but many of them offer optional paths to find new supplies. I really enjoyed this aspect of the game, as I was trying to find more ammo for any of my weapons. The combat is at its strongest when the game is throwing both ranged and melee attackers at you. These encounters felt more dynamic, whereas the bulk of the melee-only enemy encounters can feel very static as the enemies funnel towards you in a straight line. There are a good handful of encounters that take advantage of the very dark lighting, setting a very creepy mood. In these fights, you are mostly up against melee attackers and they can really catch you off guard in the darkly lit environments. You have plenty of ammo for these situations, but the atmosphere will keep you on edge. Industria does have a bit of a rocky start. So at first, the game starts out pretty well. There's a nice build up to the action as your character is woken up by a phone call, and the player is then thrusted into the story. It creates some urgency and mystery with the situation at hand. The apartment allows you to interact with some of the items, and the tension continues to build as you reach the street. Once you reach the Atlas building, you find out that no one is there and you are trying to find your ally. This leads to a trippy segment. So far, I think all of this is good for building tension for the eventual release with some shooting gameplay. Sadly, once you complete the black and white sequence, the pacing that was doing a good job at building up to something sort of fizzes out after this. Once you wake up, this is where the lull starts. You are introduced to some light exploration and a bunch of small puzzles as the form of gameplay. These are mostly fine, but not that engaging, and I do not think this is what was needed after the opening minutes that did a good job at building the tension. There is some light combat here as well, but it only revolves around the melee, which is not very good. But once you meet up with your point of contact for most of the game and you get a pistol, the game greatly swings back in the other direction, and it is mostly enjoyable until its final moments. I bring all of this up because Industria has a mixed start to its game. It sort of effectively hooks the player within its first 20 minutes, but the stuff that follows this is not that interesting and does not feel like a good payoff for what the tension was building up to. I think the game would have benefited from introducing its gunplay a lot sooner than it did. Thankfully, after about the first hour of this 4 to 5 hour game, Industria hits a nice stride. It is at this point where the game will have more combat, along with providing the player with their arsenal of weapons to use, and the enjoyable exploration. Visually, this game is very inviting, and it is very impressive what these developers were able to do with the limited scope for this indie title. I had a lot of fun with this, so much so I would gladly play a game triple the length of this just exploring a city, fighting robots, and gathering supplies. The game is at its strongest while in combat and exploring. The puzzle-solving elements mostly feel tacked on since they are really only used within the opening hour of the game. That is another thing to mention. The opening hour might make you think the entire game is a walking simulator, when that is not how the majority of the game plays. Industria doesn't really make the best first impression, but thankfully it gets better and remains so throughout most of its runtime. From the story side of things, it's mostly enjoyable. I like the initial mystery. The elements surrounding the story are interesting, but I think the best aspect about the narrative is the friendship between your character Nora and Brent. Brent is the first person you meet when you wake up, and he is the guy on the radio trying to help you out. These two eventually grow, and the chemistry between them is good, and even have some appreciated humor through some of their later interactions. What could have been improved is the abrupt ending. Without spoiling anything, you reach your destination and the game is providing you with the start of an exposition dump. And as you start getting some information and context, the game just ends. There is no resolution, and it feels like we are left hanging, and ultimately resulted in an unsatisfactory ending.
I don't know who you are, but if you want to live longer than 5 minutes, you should probably get the hell out of there.
Then tell me how!
The elevator needs power. The steam machines through the door underneath me, I already hope.
Industria is a really fun experience and a bit of a gem for this year, and I identified some more flaws outside of the story's ending. For one, I thought the main voice actress was a bit uneven. She is mostly good throughout the campaign, but there are a good amount of times where it sounded like she wasn't acting, but rather just reading her lines. I had a few odd glitches, like a door that allowed me to enter even though I think I should not have been able to go through it. I had 2 instances of funny deaths causing enemies to react in an odd way. At the rail yard, I had my one and only crash for the game. I do think the enemies needed better balancing and variety in their attacks. Many of the melee attackers will run towards you in a straight line, making them very easy to take out, resulting in many of the encounters feeling just a bit too easy. The bulk of the enemies need to be close to you to do any damage, but I think if they had more dynamic movement, either trying to evade your fire, jumping, or something other than just running straight for me. The combat works better when you have a variety of different enemy types to fight, as you need to contend with both melee and ranged fighters. I also felt like it was a missed opportunity to not include a final boss fight or a climactic encounter to bookend the gameplay portion of the game. While a good boss fight would have been great for this, I think even a hard fight where you had to face off against all the enemy types at once could have been really satisfying. The game does have a good amount of flaws, with all of my prior comments and the rocky start and the unsatisfactory ending, but the game still does provide a really enjoyable journey. It has some bumps in areas that could be improved, but I generally enjoyed the gunplay and the exploration. Before we move to the conclusion, I want to mention the soundtrack. There were plenty of short, somber tracks that would pop up here and there throughout the campaign, and while none of them played very long, they were very memorable when they showed up. Here are a few tracks from the game. Overall, Industria is a flawed yet very fun gem of 2021. The gunplay is pretty good, along with the enjoyable exploration. While the robots could have been more interesting to fight, firing off the weapons never got old, and I always enjoyed seeing their arms and legs get blown off. The exploration meant that you would be searching every room that you came across for more supplies. The best part about the story is the relationship between the player and Brent. There is good chemistry there and really holds the narrative together. For the flaws, there was a lack of a final climactic encounter, an unsatisfactory ending to the story, and other elements that could have benefited from more polish. But overall, this was an impressive indie title in many ways, and I look forward to what these developers make next. I recommend Industria. If you are interested in being notified of new videos, please hit the subscribe button and bell. And if you would like to support the channel and get early access to content, please check out my Patreon. All of the links will be at the end of the video and within the description. And thank you very much for watching.